So thank you everybody for coming this morning. This is Ku-ring-gai Council's 13th Open for Business webinar. Up until the end of the last financial year, we were running these sessions on a weekly basis, but we've now moved to monthly. And today, I'm really pleased to welcome a local business coach, Sian Mertens, who is bringing 20 years of corporate HR and OD experience and coaching experience to the session this morning. And we're going to be talking about improving your well-being. Now, this is particularly important for small business. If you're not firing on all cylinders, then there's a potential that your business won't either. If you're sick or if you're not doing your best, then your business can quickly deteriorate. It's particularly important in these challenging times, and I think everybody's suffering to a greater or lesser degree with the various challenges that COVID's putting on us. So this is a really timely session, and hopefully Sian will be able to give you some really useful information that you can apply really quickly and help you improve your personal well-being and the performance of your business. So without any further ado, I will hand you over to Sian. Thanks, Sian.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So you've heard a little bit about my background. I've obviously come from the HR area, and then I kind of moved into the talent and organisational development space when I got a little bit despondent with HR because we were focusing on the negatives all of the time, doing lots of restructuring and performance management. So then I went and did a master's in coaching psychology and started my own business a few years ago now. So I'm really focused in this wellbeing space. I do lots of one-to-one coaching with different sorts of leaders. And also do quite a bit of work in leadership development and talent acceleration as well. So now you know a little bit about me. I'd love to know a little bit about you. So if you could go into the chat space, I'd love to know what sort of business that you're leading and the size of the teams that you're leading. And if you're a sole trader, don't be embarrassed. I am a sole trader and I'm quite proud. I work on my own. So feel free to just write in there what it is that your business does and how many people are in your organisation or team. Awesome, thanks Annie. Sole trader in health and wellness. Fitness business, coaching, great. Consulting business, right, we've got people with 3 staff, 2 staff. Strata management and real estate. Sole trader, auditing, fantastic. Freelance medical writing practice. So lots of people sole traders today. This is going to be really great for you guys to think about how you can look after your own well-being.
And just to say, sorry to interrupt, Sian, most of the people within our network would be sole traders or small business.
Right.
Just one other person wrote in the Q&A, sole trader catering 2 staff. So if anybody can put your comments in the chat box, and then if you put the questions in the Q&A, we can then refer to those later on. Thanks, Sian. Sorry about that.
No worries. Thank you. All right. So, as I said, in my business, we focus quite a lot on wellbeing. And the reason that we did that was because we're very focused on things like the confidence and capability of our leaders and bringing the human back to business. So we partnered with the Wellbeing Lab, which is a Michelle McQuaid program. And what that allows us to do is to share a lot of the latest research in psychology, in systems theory and neuroscience as it relates to wellbeing. So everything that I'm going to show you today is based in some kind of scientific evidence. And we like to be really clear about that, is that we're only sharing things that have actually been shown through evidence to actually work. So what I really want to share with you today, and what we promised, was that you were going to walk away with a 5-minute wellbeing plan, and that's absolutely the case. In order to get to that, I want to start by really helping you to understand a little bit more about what wellbeing is. And then I want you to just engage with us as we go throughout the session. So I'm going to ask, like I just did then, for you to share in the chat things that are going on for you and how we can kind of help you. And then we're going to do a couple of polls along the way, which will help us understand how we can navigate through the session. You should all have a copy, hopefully, of the playbook, which looks something like this, which was sent out on an email beforehand. And there's a few pages in there that we'll use as we go through the session as well. All right, so we're going to start today with understanding wellbeing in a little bit more detail. So the first thing we really want to talk about is, you know, when you're thinking about how you're feeling, as Will said, and the quality of your interactions that you have with other people and the quality of your work, when you're feeling a bit tired or flat or disconnected, obviously the quality starts to go downhill a little bit. And we're not being our best self when we're in some of those interactions. So we want to kind of help you today by busting some of the myths about wellbeing, helping you to discover some really tiny ways that you can change your wellbeing behaviours, and give you a toolbox of really simple actions that you can take. And as we said, what we promised on the box was that you'd be able to do that in less than 5 minutes a day. So that's what we're hoping to deliver. All right, so before we kind of get started into describing a little bit more about wellbeing and why you should invest in it, I'm going to ask you to go back into the chat box and just tell me, what is it that you think wellbeing is? How would you describe it to someone? So just put your thoughts in there. I'd love to hear what you think wellbeing is. Feeling happy, positive outlook, being confident and content, not feeling totally stressed out, being balanced, healthy state and content, healthy physically and mentally, feeling good about yourself and the world in which you live, balanced, healthy, great, fantastic. There's lots of great definitions coming up. The ability to engage with others in a meaningful way, being thriving, great, feeling positive, being healthy and happy. Right, so you're all on the right track. I'm going to give you a definition that will help us with this a little bit. So this is the definition that we use at the Wellbeing Lab. And so in its simplest form, what we say wellbeing is our ability to feel good and function effectively as we navigate the natural highs and lows that we all experience. And the really important part there is that there are natural highs and lows. We all go through them, and we probably all have in the last few months in particular. So what's really important is that we notice that being well and having well-being or high well-being can actually have such an amazing impact on us, and particularly on the way that we run our businesses as well. So here's some of the data that actually shows the impact it has from an individual perspective. So if you've got high well-being, you're more likely to feel engaged and confident, you're more likely to be innovative and creative, more resilient, you generally have more purpose or meaning in the work that you're doing, you'll have better relationships, and you're also likely to have better physical health. And a lot of these things you guys were just talking about in the chat box. But what's also interesting is that there's huge impact when we think about organizations. So as a group of people, generally you'll have higher productivity, higher profitability, and businesses that have high wellbeing generally have more of an impact in the work that they do. So there's heaps of research behind all of this to show that there's a massive impact that we can have when we focus on our wellbeing and we're able to understand how to make that happen. Now, that's kind of impact that we've seen happen to other people. What I'm really interested in is you guys and how we can have an impact on your wellbeing today. So we're going to start by just thinking about where we are from a wellbeing perspective. So what I'm going to get you to do is going to sound a little strange because you're not on video anyway. So I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and take a really deep breath for me. So take a really deep breath in and a really deep breath out, and just think for a moment about the last month. And I want you to think about how you've been feeling over that past month. I'm going to ask you to take another deep breath in and out. So I'm going to explain 4 different options, and I want you to pick the one that best describes over the past month, if you took everything into consideration and everything that you've kind of been working through, how you've been feeling over that month. So the first option is, keep your eyes closed as I kind of go through these definitions. Frankly, you've been really struggling. You found things have been really hard. Everything seemed really difficult for you. You don't really want to get out of bed in the morning, and everything just feels like it's really hard work, and it's a big uphill struggle for you, and you're finding it quite exhausting. Okay, our second option is, over the last month, you've been feeling on top of the world. Everything is coming together. It's all going really well, and you're feeling quite good and full of energy. The third option is that perhaps you're not feeling terrible, but you're just kind of getting by. You're pulling yourself through the days. It might be a little bit grey or mundane at the moment. It might feel quite repetitive and there's no end in sight, but you're making it work despite the fact that it's feeling quite hard. And the final option here is that you've been living well despite some struggles. So those struggles might be permanent or they might be temporary, but in the last month it's been a bit testing for you, but you're feeling a bit resilient and you've managed to navigate your way through some of those lumps and bumps that are going on for you. So take a moment. I want you to check in your gut, see which one feels the best for you. I'm going to put those options up on the screen, and then I'm going to launch a poll, and I'm going to ask you to just tell us. It's an anonymous poll, so we don't know who's answered what. I'd really like to get an understanding of how everyone's going at the moment. So the poll should be up on your screen. You just need to select one of those options, and then I'll share the results with everybody. Okay, so we've got about 20 people so far. Okay, a couple more people to go. All right. Here are our results. So you can see the bottom two, we've got people who are living well despite some struggles and some who are not feeling terrible but just getting by. And I'd really like to say thank you to the person or people who said that they were really struggling. We're going to talk a little moment in about struggle and how important it is to acknowledge that struggle is actually happening. So it's fantastic that everyone has the ability to kind of reflect on what's going on for them. And now we're going to talk a little bit about what we do with how we're feeling and how we move forward from there. Okay. So if we think about well-being, a lot of us would probably think that it kind of sits on this continuum from languishing or having really low well-being up to thriving, which would obviously be really high well-being. But at the Wellbeing Lab, we've done quite a lot of research in the last 3 years, and we've been able to show that it's a bit more complex than this. And I'm going to share with you what that actually looks like. So we've done 3 different workforce samples across Australia and the US in the last 3 years. And some of the stats that I'm going to share with you in a moment were taken in December 2019 in Australia, which was right in the middle of the bushfire crisis. So just take that into consideration as you kind of look at the stats. But what's interesting is that they're quite consistent to the other 2 samples that we did as well. And what we did was ask them exactly the same question that we just asked you. And here is what we found. So 15% of that working population said that they were consistently thriving, and 41% that said they were living well despite struggle. Now, what's really interesting about these 2 groups is that although you've got this 41% who said that they were struggling quite a bit at the moment, the outcomes statistically for these 2 groups were actually very, very similar. So they all had higher job satisfaction, they all had better performance, they all had a greater commitment to their organisation, and they reported higher levels of performance for the teams that they worked in. So despite the fact that a lot of people were really struggling, they were actually still getting the same outcomes from a work perspective. So what did differentiate these 2 groups, though, was that we found that this group, so the living well despite struggle group here, actually had more resilience than the people who were consistently thriving. And we found they were the most resilient group of all of the different 4 different quadrants. And the reason for that is because they had actually found ways to be more resilient as they came across these struggles, to find ways to actually work through them. So what's interesting there is that struggle is not really an obstacle for wellbeing, it can actually be an enhancer. And I'm going to talk about how we actually make that possible in a minute. What we'll do now first is to have a look who sits kind of down here. So we've got people who are not feeling bad but just getting by, we had 34%, and then we had 10% of people who said that they were really struggling. So for the outcomes that we talked about that were sitting on this post-it note, from a work perspective, the people who were not feeling bad and just getting by had worse outcomes on all of those areas, and the people who were really struggling had worse outcomes again. So what we take away from all of that is that the difference is not actually in the struggle, it's in the level of thriving. And there were 2 things when we dug into the data that helped us understand how people actually impacted on that. So how did they impact on their level of thriving? The first thing was that they felt more confident on how they could shape their well-being. So they had some tips and tools and some skills in order to impact on their well-being. And the second thing that changed it was that they had some kind of motivation to try and shape their well-being. So they wanted to change it and they could do something about it. So if we think about the people in the bottom of the chart, they didn't have the knowledge, the tools, or the support to lift up their well-being. And that then had that kind of roll-on effect into their job performance, engagement, and their satisfaction at work. So there's two ahas when we think about this, when we look at all of this data together. One is that struggle is just as much a part of wellbeing as thriving is. And that's something that I really want you to take away from today, is struggling. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. It means that we need to deal with that struggle and learn how we can kind of move through it. There's no shame in it, and we just need to learn to talk about it a bit more. The second part is that wellbeing has a bottom line impact on how engaged you are at work, on how you perform, and your commitment to your organisation. So we need to be really understanding of how we can impact on our wellbeing in order to make those differences from a work perspective. So the focus for our session, if you think about the answer that you gave just a moment ago, if you're sitting at the top, you've obviously already got some skills on how you can impact on your own wellbeing, and we're going to build on those a little bit more today. If you're sitting underneath that line and you're in the really struggling or not feeling bad but just getting by categories, one of the things that I want you to think about today is just acknowledging that your wellbeing might not be where you want it to be right now, and that's absolutely okay. And think about some of the small actions you can take away from today that will have a really positive impact very quickly. But the third thing you could do is probably reach out for a little bit of support after the webinar today to see how you can get some support from those around you and talk about the struggle that's kind of going on for you at the moment. Now, something else to notice as we look at this is that our wellbeing changes all of the time. So if I'd asked you this question a couple of months ago, you might find that you would have had a very different answer. And so an example of that is if we talked about this when we'd just gone into isolation, I absolutely was sitting down in this really struggling section here. And the reason for that was because my husband went into self-quarantine because someone at his work tested positive to COVID-19, and my children started homeschooling on exactly the same day. So I was trying to keep a prisoner alive downstairs by feeding him 3 meals a day and learn how to homeschool my children while running my own business at the same time. So absolutely really struggling. If I look at it now, I'd say I'm sitting up here in the living well despite struggle. There's still some things going on that I'm finding are a bit of a struggle, but I'm living well despite all of that. So think about the fact that you need to actually check in on your wellbeing quite often, and then you can take the right steps in order to start to change it. All right. So our goal is to be intelligent and active stewards in shaping our own well-being. And the way that I want to help you with that today is to help you accept and navigate the natural and reasonable ebbs and flows that go on in your life. The second thing that we're going to do is think about how we can more intelligently and actively manage your well-being and the well-being of those around you, because obviously as sole traders, our family obviously plays a lot of a big picture in the way that we go about doing our businesses. And the final one is being willing to play and experiment and learn what works best for you in different situations. So we're going to ask you to kind of play along with us as we move through the webinar. So what I'm going to ask now is that we're going to kind of move into how we change behaviours. And changing behaviours we all think is a really simple thing, but what we find is we've often tried to change some of our behaviours and it's been a little bit hit or miss. We haven't been able to do it very well. So we're going to look at a little bit of the science about how we make this a little bit more effective, because obviously having a wellbeing plan when you walk out of here is one thing, but being able to effectively change your behaviour to make it work is something completely different. So there's a number of different reasons why behaviour change generally doesn't work, and there's a formula that actually explains it. So for example, if somebody is to, generally there's a prompt if there's a new behaviour. So if somebody puts their hand out when they first meet you like this in the olden days before COVID, you would probably put your hand out to shake their hand back. If you're sitting at a traffic light, the prompt to go is that the light turns green. So there's generally a prompt for any behaviour to happen. So I'm going to do an experiment now. I'm going to ask you to go back into the chat box. But first, what I want you to think about is that your mobile phone is ringing and you look at the screen and there's a reason why you choose not to answer it. There might be a couple of reasons. So I want you to write down 2 reasons why you haven't answered your phone. But then in the chat box, I'm going to ask you if one of these reasons is something like you were busy, you were on another call, or you were in the shower, or you were driving, I want you to type in the chat box the reason why you didn't answer was something to do with your ability. So just type ability if that was one of the reasons why you wouldn't have answered your phone. Great, so there's a few people saying that that's one of the reasons they wouldn't answer their phone. Now, and other reasons generally would be that it was that you're in a bad mood, you didn't want to talk to that person, you didn't know who was calling. That kind of reason is a motivation reason. So if there were any motivation reasons in the reasons you wrote down, could you write that down in the chat box? Just put motivation. Right. So there's both ability and motivation reasons why we don't do certain things. So what we're going to do now is have a look at the formula that makes up behavior change. So we talked about a prompt, and we talked about there being a motivation and ability part of how we change our behavior. So the formula is that behavior happens when there is motivation and ability and a prompt that all happen at the same time. And that's how we make the behavior actually happen. And so often when our efforts to kind of change our behavior fail, it's because we're judging ourselves for not having sufficient willpower. So that's the motivation. We aim too high too soon. That's the ability. So we say we're going to run 10 kilometers where maybe we haven't run 1 kilometer recently, or we fail to really create effective prompts to make it happen. So as we go through today, and I talk to you a bit about what makes up wellbeing and how you can start to impact on it, what I'd really like you to do is to think about what have you got the motivation to change? So what do you really want to do? And then I want you to think about what you've got the ability to do. So what are you able to do in the next month or so? And the final part, the prompts, is something I'm going to help you with at the end. And I've got a whole heap of prompts that I can show you that will help you to kind of implement some of these behavior changes. So think about that as we work through. What have you got the motivation to change, and what have you got the ability to change? All right. And what BJ Fogg, so he's the one who came up with that particular formula, he talks about this. So when you know how to adjust the components of human behavior, you can begin to tackle any behavior change challenge. And so he basically talks about the fact that when your changes fail, so if some of those well-being habits might fail, it's not because you're weak. It's generally because the habit recipe is off and you need to adjust it. So we're going to talk about some of those adjustments that you can make as we kind of work through towards the end of the webinar today. All right, so let's talk about how you care for your well-being. And obviously we're all very unique individuals, but what we're going to look at is that decades of research kind of shows us that we've got some unique differences, but also we have a lot in common as humans, and a lot in common in what makes us feel good and what helps us to do well. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So the roadmap for wellbeing that I'm going to share with you was built by Martin Seligman, and he calls it PERMA, and you'll see why in a moment as all the letters kind of come up on the screen. And he talks about the 6 different pillars, and these are the ones we're going to dig into as we work through the webinar today. So the first one is that you need to have a presence of heartfelt positive emotions. And here he talks about things like joy or interest, pride, gratitude, and serenity. And they actually change how our brain works, and I'm going to talk you through that in a moment. The second pillar is engagement, and this is the development of our strengths. So how do we use our strengths more often every day to enjoy the tasks that we need to complete in our work? The third one is relationships, because we are all human beings and we actually have a genuine need for connection with other people. So even as we've been in isolation, I'm sure all the introverts, including me, have missed seeing our friends and having that real genuine connection. It's a really important part of who we are as humans. The fourth one is meaning. And this is the chance to have make a positive difference, but also have a kind of why as to why we're doing what we're doing every single day. The fifth one is accomplishment. So we obviously need to feel that what we're doing achieves something and that it matters. And the final one that we're going to talk about is the one we all know and love, but sometimes don't put enough focus on, and that's health. So that's how we move, how we sleep, and how much we are, what we're eating, making sure that we're creating the right level of energy for what we need to get done during the day. Now, what Seligman talks about is that we need a presence of all of these pillars in order to have high well-being, but that it's going to be different. We need a different level depending on what's important to us. So for some people, health might be their most important pillar and they need that to be particularly high in order to feel well. For others, it might be that they have that level of meaning and that they feel like they're making a positive difference for others. So you do need to have a level of each of these in order to have well-being, but what level you have will depend on who you are as an individual. So just keep that in mind as we move through. And before we jump into the detail on each of these, I'm going to get you again to just think about what's going on for you right now. So you'll see in your playbook on page 10, a page that looks a little bit like this. And I want you to think for a moment and give yourself a score out of 10 for each of these. So for positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, accomplishment, and health, I want you to think just over the past week this time rather than the last month, and give yourself a score out of 10 on how they're going at the moment. So I'll give you a minute or so just to do that, and then we'll talk about what we do with those. All right. So what I want you to think about now is obviously you've got a range of scores for each of those. And as I said before, the level that you need in each one of these pillars differs depending on who you are and what's important to you. So your lowest score might not be the one that you want to put all of your focus and attention on. It might be one, say health is most important to you, and at the moment you have a score of 6 and you want to raise that up to about a 9. That might be the one that you want to focus on, despite the fact that positive emotions is only sitting at a 3. So think about which 2 of these are most important to you that you'd like to really focus on, and that's what we're going to do when we get to the end and start talking about our actions. So just put an asterisk against 2 of those. All right, now we are going to jump in and talk about each of the different pillars, and I'll give you a little bit more information on each of them and how you can start to make a change with some of these. So the first one we've got is prioritizing positive emotions, and the research on this, some of it comes from Daniel Goldman, and you might recognize his name. He started some of the research on emotional intelligence quite a number of years ago, and his research shows that 20 to 30% of our performance at work is determined by our mood. So this is why positive emotions are so important. So there's been additional research done by Professor Barbara Fredrickson, and she's come up with a theory that she calls broaden and build. And basically what Barbara did was she's taken people into her laboratory, and you can actually do a YouTube search of this, and she talks about it in quite a bit of detail. It's quite interesting. And she will induce you into a particular emotional state by showing you a video. So she'll either show you something that induces you to feel happy and joyous, so something good that's happened on a video, or she'll get you into a neutral or a negative state by showing you something that makes you upset or angry. And what she then does is she gives people a task to do, and she sees what their performance on those tasks is like based on what emotional state she's put them into. And what her research has shown us is that when you're in a positive emotional state, you're more likely to see 75% of what's actually in front of you from your peripheral vision. So basically what you're seeing in front of you, you can take in 75% of that. If she's put you into a negative mood, you only actually take in 15% of what's in front of you and what you actually see. Now, I actually was reading through this yesterday, and then I was making dinner for my family, and I was looking in the fridge, and I wasn't in a very good mood because I just had an argument about homework. And what I was looking for was actually right in front of me, but I couldn't see it. And it took my husband to point it out to me. And then I thought back to this piece of research and thought, actually, it's quite true. I could only see 15% of what was right in front of my face. So this is really important when you start to think about how you're going about your day and when it would be important to be able to take in more information. So if you think about when you're in a positive mood, the chemicals in your brain actually help to broaden your mind. So things happen like you have the ability to take in more information. You're able to think more creatively and outside of the box. You'll actually do better at complex problem solving tasks. And it also helps us to think more about the group or about we than it does about when we're in a negative mind state, when we think more about me because we're in that fight or flight response. So in general, things happen when you induce this positive state that gives us increased energy, it reduces our stress, it broadens our minds, and it helps us to make connections with other people. So what we're not saying here is that we don't want to have any of those neutral or negative emotions. All of these emotions are really important, but it's about being more mindful of when it would be important to have some of these positive emotions. So if you think about when you're working with other people or when you're working on a particular task and you need to maybe brainstorm or think creatively, come up with new ideas, inducing a positive emotional state is actually really going to help you to do that. But again, if you want to do something where you are working on detail and you need to focus on just the task that's in front of you, so it could be doing your BAS or something like that, then what you need to be doing is actually being in a more neutral state, because it will keep you more focused on the task that's right in front of you. So just think about that as you go about some of your tasks during the day. So that's the broaden part of broaden and build. The build part of the theory actually talks about the fact that we can accrue some of these positive emotions over time. It's like putting money in the bank and you can pull on them later on. So part of this is that we're able to build our resources physically, because we're not getting as much of that hormone called cortisol, which is the stress hormone. It means that physically we're actually feeling better. Intellectually, we're actually able to do better things because we're taking in more information more often. It's what we talked about a minute ago. So you can think more creatively because you're adding on to that information more often. Socially, because we're tending to actually talk to more people and wanting to collaborate when we're being positive, so we have better relationships generally. And also emotionally, we're more resilient because we're in that positive space. So there's so many benefits to actually having positive emotions as part of our lives. Now, as we go through each of the pillars, what I'm going to share with you is what we call a wellbeing nudge. So this is the activity or the change that you can make to start to get this in as part of your day. So for this one, what we say is prioritizing a jolt of joy to start your day to make sure that you have the energy to play. And this is just a small moment, and we say to do it in the morning because, as we said at the very beginning, the mood that you're in at the beginning of the day can impact on your performance for the whole day. So what can you do in the morning that's a jolt of joy? And some activities or ideas would be giving your kids a hug in bed before you get up. Maybe it's a pet that you want to do that with, connecting with a friend, playing your favorite song up really loud and dancing around the kitchen. It could be listening to a positive podcast, could be going for a walk, it could be just looking at nature. All of this is really low-hanging fruit, and it's about how do you get that jolt of joy at the beginning of the day that's really going to put you in the right frame of mind and open up your mind a little bit more. And again, if you're working with others, even if it's your clients and things like that, when you're at the beginning of a meeting with them, how do you induce some positivity so that you're getting all of these great benefits out of the conversation and they're more positive and they've got their mind open and broadened to what it is that you're about to propose to them? It can be really helpful. So we use this in facilitation quite a lot. We'll start, if you've ever been to a training program, we generally make you do something a little bit strange at the beginning where you're connecting with other people and getting to know who they are, but it's also about inducing those positive emotions so that you're open to what's about to happen and the learning that will happen in the room. Okay, so that's positive emotions. We're going to move on to the second pillar here, and this one is about building engagement. So the more engaged you are is generally when you're bringing your strengths to work with you every day. And your strengths, we say, are your neurological superpowers. So they're your patterns of thinking and feeling and behaving that you've built up over time. And we wired our brains to be able to generally do things more effectively if we're using our strengths. We have more energy, we find them more enjoyable, and we generally have higher levels of mastery in them, obviously, because we like doing them and they're a strength of ours. So an example of strengths from my perspective is, one of mine is honesty, which can get me into trouble sometimes. Perseverance, humility, and perspective. They're some of my key strengths. So I'm going to launch a poll now, and I'm going to ask you, if we put that question out onto the table, would you be able to tell us what your top 5 strengths are? So the question is just a yes or no. If I asked you right now, would you be able to answer the question on what your top 5 strengths are? Just 1 second and I'll launch the poll. So generally we find a lot of people can tell us maybe 1 or 2 of their strengths, but maybe not all 5. Luckily, I've explained strengths well enough, it looks like, because nobody's asking what a strength is, so that's good. All right, I'll share the results so far. Right, so we've got about 68% of people telling us that they could name their top 5 strengths right now, and then 32% of people saying that they can't. So there's a few different things that you can do from a strengths perspective, but what I want to share with you first is some of the research about why this is so important. So there's this one piece of research, and I share this quite a lot in coaching when we're talking about performance with leaders who are talking to their employees about performance. And this piece of research showed that if a leader goes into a conversation with their direct report and they talk about only their strengths, so what they're doing really well, for a period of time after that conversation, performance will increase by 36%. If a leader goes into a conversation and talks more about weaknesses and the gaps that that person has, generally for the same period of time afterwards, their performance will decrease by 27%. So we're talking about an increase of 36% to performance if we talk about strengths, versus a decrease of 27% when we're talking about gaps and weaknesses. So if we think about how we go about having those conversations every day, it can have such a big impact on what we're actually doing and the performance that we're getting from people that we're around all the time. So there's other things that our strengths actually impact on. It's not just performance. The other thing that it impacts on is our confidence. So our confidence improves when we're using our strengths more, obviously because we're good at these things and we enjoy them more. It can also improve our resilience, because those mundane or boring tasks that we really don't like to do, if we find a way to use our strengths and navigate our way through them, it gives us a little bit more energy for our day. And then finally, our strengths also help improve all dimensions of well-being, so physical, relational, emotional, and social. So the question is, how do we pull this off and how do we make it happen? And there's 3 steps that the research shows. First, you need to discover them. Then you need to develop them, and then you need to deploy them. So in order to discover them, and a lot of you have said that you know what your top 5 strengths are, if you want some more detail on what they are, you can do a really simple assessment online. And these assessments, I'll share with you via email afterwards, but you can go on to viacharacter.org. So it's VIA, which stands for Values in Action, character.org. And it's about a 5-minute survey, and it will send you a report afterwards with your top 5 strengths and the definitions of them in there. Or you can order a book online from Amazon and do something like this one, which is the Gallup Strengths Finder. And again, that one's more work related, and it will talk to you about what your top 5 talents or strengths are. So once you're really clear on what they are, what we're trying to do then is to get into a sense of flow. And this is when you're completely absorbed in what you're doing. So you might have found this feeling when maybe you've been running in the past, maybe it's when you're smashing out a project, and it's when you lose all sense of time of what's going on around you and you're just really in your zone. So what we're trying to do by using our strengths is to get into that sense of flow more often during our workday. So our wellbeing nudge here is turning our morning to-do into a ta-da by aligning our strengths to the task. And it may sound a little silly, but basically what I'm asking you to do is to think about bringing the right tools to the task. So if you were going to dig a hole, you would bring a shovel rather than a rake. And what we're talking about here is, how do you get the right strength? So out of those top 5 strengths, which is the right one that you could bring to that really boring or mundane task that you've got to get done today? So some examples here are, if you find you have a strength of humour, how do you increase the energy and relieve some of the stress of the people around you by using that sense of humour? How do you use your strength of creativity to actually, pull together maybe a report that you find quite mundane and boring to do? So using that strength of creativity to make it more fun for you. How do you use your strength of self-regulation to put a little bit more boundaries while you're working from home around, what's home life and what's work life? Using that sense of the strength of self-regulation to make that happen. So depending on what your strengths are, you have to think about how you can actually apply them to those to-do tasks during the day. So that's the wellbeing nudge for our strengths. The next one is investing in relationships, and this is our 3rd pillar. And relationships are extremely important for humans. It's all about how we connect with others. And there was a study that Google did quite a number of years ago now. It's called Project Aristotle, and it's fascinating if you're interested in this kind of thing. So Google it, because Google's got all of the stuff up there. And basically what they did was they looked at high-performing teams across globally at Google. How did they actually figure out who were the highest performing teams? So what are the qualities of those teams? And one of the distinguishing factors that they found was that the highest performing teams actually shared a sense of psychological safety in their relationships with each other. So what this means is that rather than biting their tongue and not sharing what was going on, or bitching and moaning, shaming and blaming each other, they were willing to actually be really honest with what was going on and use some curiosity instead of judgment. So recognizing that they're all really learning as things are going on during the day, and sometimes they're getting it wrong, but they're sharing those learnings with each other, and then that helps to continue to learn along the way. So the challenge for us in these relationships is that our brain is actually wired to be very judgmental, and it's not because we're bad people, but it's just the way that our brain keeps us safe. That's the way that it was kind of built. So a different way to think about this is it's about genuine connections, and people really need connections that matter because we're fundamentally social creatures. So Brené Brown has done quite a lot of research into this, and you might have seen, she's written books, she's all over YouTube, she's done research into courage and bravery. And she talks about, as you can see on the screen, what if people are doing the best they can with what they have right now? And when this concept was shown to me the first time, I found it quite challenging, and a lot of people do find it quite challenging. And particularly coming from a HR background where we think about we're trying to increase performance all of the time, which means that there's always something more that we can give. But think about it this way. How many of you got up this morning and came to work with the intention of being difficult, disruptive, and disappointing? Generally, we find nobody puts their hand up when we're talking about this in a classroom setting, right? But if I ask the same question, how many people think that one of their clients or their customers or someone else in their team actually got out of bed and came to work trying to be difficult, disruptive, and disappointing? At some point, we've thought that about someone else that we work with. We've all thought that at some point. But what's important here is to think about the intention that kind of sits behind it. And the important piece is that intention. So rather than thinking about judging people for what's going on right now and the way that they're showing up, it's about leaning into those conversations with a little bit more generosity and curiosity. So they're the two things that help us to take this kind of perspective about what's going on for people. So think about it this way, even if you're not doing the best that you can with all that you have in this moment, sometimes it's actually all that you've got to give right now. And for some of us, it's a bit of a struggle to actually even, turn up to work and do what we need to do, particularly as sole traders, as we need to motivate ourselves to do these things. But that's true for everyone else as well. So the wellbeing nudge here is to improve your relationships by chewing on curiosity instead of judgment when it comes to other people's actions. So if you're having some of these challenges and you're finding yourself being a little bit judgmental of other people, as we all do, it's about slowing down and getting curious. So thinking about what's actually going on and asking a question. So ask them what's going on for them and just be curious and open up the conversation. And the second question to ask them is, what can you help them with? That's the generosity part of this. So asking them what's going on, letting them share their struggles, and then being generous is a way to start to change some of these relationships. All right, let's move on to our fourth pillar here, which is about fostering meaning. So studies show that the number one thing that people actually want from their work, more than anything else, so more than extra money, more than flexibility, more than work-life balance or job security, is a feeling that they're actually making a positive difference for someone else in the world. So they want to have a reason why they're coming to work every day. So there's some kind of meaning and purpose in what they do. So the personal benefits of having some kind of meaning or purpose in your work is that it helps you to have the energy to fight through some of the challenges and obstacles that you might face during the day. It also helps you to make more masterful contributions because you're quite selective about the choices that you're making, because you've got this guiding light for you around that meaning and purpose. It can also reduce your depression, it can improve sleep and add years to your life. So research has shown all of these fantastic benefits. So that's from an individual kind of perspective. If we look at it from an organisational perspective, generally what we find is that organisations who have more meaning or more meaning and purpose helps to bind people together because they'll work together towards that meaning and purpose. They've got a sense of moral code. They generally are more motivated to work harder together. They sabotage each other less, and they're more likely to stay with an organisation because they believe in what they're doing. And all of those things impact on the bottom line. So some great benefits personally, but also from an organisational perspective. So Adam Grant has done quite a lot of research into this area, and what he talks about is that we don't need to be solving the world's problems in order to have some kind of meaning or purpose. So we don't have to be solving climate change, but we do need to feel that we're making a positive difference for at least one other person, and it could be one of your clients on the other end of a Zoom call today. Knowing that you've made a positive difference actually really helps your well-being. So the question is, how do you find meaning in even the most mundane tasks that you have to get done? And this wellbeing nudge is about asking a question or two questions. Who does this task help, and what difference does it make for them? So sometimes this can surface the meaning really quickly when you ask these two questions, and other times this one can feel more like peeling an onion. So you might identify who the task helps and the difference that it makes for them, but it still might not feel very meaningful for you, and you need to keep peeling the onion a little bit more. Then you ask again, so who does it help after that, and what difference might it make for them, until you reach your kind of aha meaning moment and you can find a bit of purpose in that task that you're actually doing. All right, let's move on to our next one. This is growing accomplishment, and this is our 5th pillar in the PERMA roadmap. And this one, there's a bit of research from Angela Duckworth, and she is one of the researchers who talks about grit. And she says basically that our talent and our IQ are simply the promise of what is possible. They're not the guarantee, right? So the talent and IQ that you have are a promise of what you could actually achieve, but that's not what's going to get you there. It's actually the effort that we put in that's going to get us there. And this is all about grit and resilience. So you may have heard of Carol Dweck. She's become quite famous in the last 10 years or so, and she's put forward what she calls growth mindset. So she talks about growth mindset compared to a fixed mindset. So an example I would give you is that I probably have quite a fixed mindset over my mathematical abilities, and I always have, and I think that I'm not good at maths. What Carol talks about is having a growth mindset, is shifting the way that we think about things like that, and shifting the way we think about our abilities. And she would say, maybe you're not good at maths yet, but that doesn't mean that you can't get there. So she says not yet is a great way to think about how we can change our mindset on growth. So basically the growth mindset recognizes that we've all been made perfectly imperfect, right? So, and I love the way that she kind of talks about that. So we can all learn and adapt and be flexible as our environment changes. But embracing this growth mindset is not always the easiest thing to do. And you'll find you fluctuate between a fixed mindset on some things and a growth mindset on others. So when we're talking about, going to work every day, a lot of the time we've got performance goals, and these are quite fixed. There are things that you need to make happen. And these absolutely count. But what she says is what's more important is having some learning goals around this. And this ultimately allows you to reach those performance outcomes. But what you learn along the way from having this growth mindset, you're able to then apply to these performance goals as they change over time. So you take that learning with you. So how do we put a growth mindset into practice every day? And we talk about this learning loop, and this is basically how we've learned everything over our whole life. So if you think about, watching a baby or a toddler learn to start walking, generally they will stand up and take a step. So they're acting and they're trying something, and then they're falling on their butt and looking around and kind of assessing what happened. So what did I do right? What did I do wrong? How is that other person over there walking past me? And then they're adjusting what they did and they're acting again. So we basically do this learning loop without even knowing it. It's unconscious to us through most of our life in most of the things that we've learned to do. And what we're saying for our wellbeing nudge is we want you to make this learning loop more conscious. So it's about, at the end of the day, asking yourself, what went well, where did I struggle, and what did I learn? So this is bringing that learning loop to life. And it's also kind of talking back to what we mentioned at the very beginning and making struggle a part of everything that happens. So it kind of goes up and down, and it goes up and down during the day for us as well. So there's always something that we struggled with during the day. So how do we make sure that we're aware of that, and what did we learn from that? It helps us to put some of these learnings back into practice and keep our mind open as we have a growth mindset going about our work. All right, so our final pillar is heightening health. And this is the one we probably all know. So we need to eat wisely, move regularly, try and sleep for more than 8 hours a night, and have some periods of recovery and rest during the day. And here what we talk about is, we all know that we need to do this, but what sometimes doesn't happen is that we don't do it consistently. So we know that eating one piece of broccoli is not going to make us healthy, and going for one run is not going to make us fit. It's about taking little actions more consistently. This is how we start to shift our health. So here you've got a decision to make between an apple and a donut. And what Tom Rath talks about is that all of these very small decisions that come to us during the day, if we make them more consistently in a healthy way, really start to impact long-term on our health. So the trick here is that we're not making the decisions, the wrong decisions, because we can't make the right ones. It's because we don't have the energy to make the right decisions. So he talks about a virtuous cycle. The better that you eat, so make a small decision on what you're eating, will give you more energy. And if you have more energy, you're more likely to do more exercise. And if you do more exercise, you're more likely to sleep well. So these very small decisions that we make during the day start to add up into a virtuous cycle. So I'm going to ask you to interact again with us. And I want you to share in the chat box one of the best things that you've been doing from a health perspective. So eating, moving or sleeping, you know, in the last month or so that's really started to help you with your health, whatever that might be. So just share that in the chat box and we can get some ideas from each other on what's working. Walking more, going to the gym regularly, walking the dog, outside workshops, going to sleep earlier, going on hikes, going to the gym, not using sugar, reducing junk food, cycling, drinking cocktails. I'm not sure how that one's going to help, but that might make you feel good for a short time. Walking, meditation and less sugar, great. Controlling the amount of calories I eat per day. So there's some really great ones in there. Seeing friends is a great one for health too, right? Yoga, definitely getting more sleep. Great. So it sounds like you've all got something that you've started to kind of impact on. So thinking back to what Tom's saying is, how do you make small decisions throughout the day that impact on all of those different areas? So let me show you what your wellbeing nudge is for this one. And this is the quickest wellbeing nudge that I've shared with you so far. It's about taking a mindful moment to breathe in and check on how your body's feeling and listening to what it needs for more energy. So this one can be really, really impactful. And what I find quite often is if I do this after I get off a coaching call with a client and I'll take a moment to breathe, the first thing that I notice and that my body tells me is that I need to have a really big glass of water because I haven't been drinking enough water. And if I take another deep breath, my body generally tells me that I'm a bit too tired and I should be getting a little bit more sleep. So obviously the first one's easier to change than the second one. But this is a really easy one that you can implement during the day. So it could be that you have, you know, Zoom meetings or you are maybe out seeing clients. After each one of those, at certain points during your day, how do you do these mindful moments and breathe and listen to what your body's telling you that it needs for a little bit more energy to get you through the day? All right, so we've gone through all of the 6 pillars, and what I've put on here is all of the wellbeing nudges from each of the 6 pillars. So if you think about what we talked about at the very beginning, we talked about the fact that you need the confidence and the motivation in order to impact on your well-being. And so what we're trying to do here is to give you some of those skills and tools and things that you can think about to start to impact on your own well-being. So what I'd love to know now is, out of all of those 6 well-being nudges, if you could choose 1 or 2 of them, which ones would be most helpful to you? And I'm going to launch another poll to ask you that question. It's multiple choice, hopefully, so you should be able to choose as many as you like. Okay, should be up for you to see now. Okay, I've got 20 people so far, 24. Just give me a minute and I will share the results with you. Right, so our winner is positive emotions, having a jolt of joy in the day, and that's a really easy one to start to impact on. And I think our runner-up is health, so taking a mindful moment to breathe. Fantastic. So it sounds like everybody's got something out of that and some mindful wellbeing nudges that they can take. So let's talk now. Let's just get rid of this poll. A little bit about, so I said to you before, you've got to make this work for you, and it's all about, you know, what kind of resonates for you. So where some of these wellbeing nudges maybe don't hit the spot for you, that's absolutely fine. And what you'll find in the playbook that I've sent you is heaps of other ideas that you could actually use. So for positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, accomplishment, and health, you'll find there's 3 different wellbeing nudges that you can choose from. So maybe one of these is something that would be more helpful to you. And those are all in your book on page 11. And then on the next page, what you find is, if you've got a team or some people that you work with, some ideas of how you can do this together so you can start to impact on other people's wellbeing as well. And this could be your family. It doesn't have to be people that you work with. So how do you actually, you know, move more together? How do you be more mindful of how your positive emotions impact on other people as well? So these can be quite helpful, and you've got all of those in your playbook to use as well. All right, so what I promised was that we would have a wellbeing plan when we leave here today. So you've got some nudges to start with, but now we're going to kind of circle back a little bit more into how do we change some of that behavior to make these stick. And we're back to BJ Fogg. So he talks about no behavior happens without a prompt. So we're going to talk a little bit more about these prompts as well and these triggers. And these help us to perform the behavior and get us really started on the right path. So a tiny habit, this is what we're going to talk about implementing. It's a behavior that you can do at least once a day. It shouldn't take you very long, so only a minute or two, and it requires very little effort. So there's multiple ways that you can create these new habits, but this is a formula that we're going to show you that we've seen actually works, and it's very quick and easy to do. So there's some pages in your playbook that we're going to kind of play around with now, and you'll see this is what we talked about before. This is our formula. And what we're going to kind of talk through is how do we come up with something that's going to work for you. So first of all, if you think about this formula, we talked about motivation. And one of the key obstacles from a motivation perspective is that we rely on this way too much. So if we're going to implement a new health regime, maybe we said we're going to start, jogging 5 kilometers a day. The motivation is what we're kind of focusing on rather than anything else. And it's not meaningful enough. You've got to have the other piece in here as well, because your motivation will ebb and flow. The ability part, as I said before, it might be that you haven't jogged 5 kilometers for a really long time. So your ability should probably start a little bit smaller. And here what we talk about is tiny is mighty. And with these tiny habits, we want to start really small so that we get some positive reinforcement from ourselves. And once we've done it a few times, we can start to build it up a little bit more. So remember that tiny is mighty, and we want to start really, really small to impact on our well-being. And the final bit is a prompt. So lots of people kind of love habits and lots of people hate them. You can think about them as nudges as well if you like. So some of these prompts or nudges might be, I'm going to use a smaller plate when I serve up dinner, and that means I'm going to eat less. Or I'm going to wear my exercising clothes to bed, and don't laugh, I know people who do this, and they put their shoes next to the bed. So when they wake up, all they have to do is roll out of bed, put their shoes on and walk out the door. This is how you get the prompts to kind of work for you, and you take out that motivation piece so that you're basically just getting up and leaving. Now, what we're going to add to this is that there's some science around celebration and reward, and it's about this intense feeling of positive emotions that we talked about way back at the start. And we want to make sure that we're putting in a little bit of celebration and reward because it kicks our brain into gear to want to do it again. So if you think about a game of football, if you've ever watched that, basically when someone scores a goal and there's this whole amount of jumping and whooping and celebration that goes on, sometimes backflips and cartwheels, and they pull their shirts off as well. This is all celebration, but the whole point of this is that it starts to impact on the way that our brain works. So there's a neurological intensity to that makes us want to do it again. It increases our motivation to want to do it again. Even the New Zealand rugby team, when they do the haka, that's absolutely what they're doing. It's this neurological benefit that happens from actually getting all of those emotions up, right? So what I'm going to ask you to do is to think about how we can celebrate when we're putting some of these habits into place. So let's start by designing some tiny habits that we can think about. So I want you to think back to the beginning. I talked to you around selecting out of those 6 pillars, the 2 that were most important to you, and these are the ones I'm going to get you to work on now. So of those 2 pillars that you said were really important to you, I'm going to get you to come up with a tiny habit wellbeing recipe. And these are some examples. So let me just show you at the bottom. We've got an anchor moment. So this is our prompt. So it's an existing routine that you can anchor your new tiny habit to and use it as a cue. Then you've got a tiny behavior that you're going to implement. So this is a wellbeing habit that you're going to have as part of your routine, and it's really small and easy. And then the last bit is some kind of celebration that gives you that positive feeling of reward that makes you want to do it again. Now you can see we've made it really simple down here. Anchor moment is A, tiny behavior is B, and celebration is C. So you're basically coming up with an ABC that's going to be very, very simple. So an example here, after I walk into the kitchen, I will immediately drink a large glass of water, and then I will celebrate by running a victory lap around the counter. Now, a lot of people think this celebration part is really silly, but it's actually what makes your brain want to do these things again, and it gets you into a habit. So in your workbooks, you will actually find a lot of different both anchor moments on page 17. So you'll see morning, daytime and evening. We've mapped out all the different sorts of anchor moments that you might have. So it could be when you wake up, it could be when your alarm goes off, it could be when you flush the toilet, it could be when you get out of the shower, opening the front door, starting the car. It could be anything that you do regularly on a daily basis. And then on page 18, you'll find all of the tiny habit celebration examples. And even for those people, including me, when I first saw this, who thought they were a little silly, there's some in there that work for us as well. So it could just be doing a fist bump, could be humming a song, taking a bow, ticking it off your list if you're really about achievement. Finding the ones that are right for you. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to go into your workbook on page 16 and write them quite small, because I'm going to get you to do 2 in each box. So I want you to come up with an after I, whatever it is, I will, and then I will celebrate. So I'm going to ask you to come up with 2 based on the 2 perma pillars that you wanted to implement. And then I'm going to ask you to share that with us in the chat box so that we can start to see what people would like to start to change from a wellbeing perspective. And this is your 5-minute wellbeing plan that we talked about. So starting off really tiny is really important. And once you've got this habit happening every single day and it's part of what you do all the time, then you start to make it bigger. So if it was that you were going to do that run, you want to make the run go for a little bit longer. All right. So has anybody got a tiny habit that they want to share with us? Let's have a look in the chat box. So Kate has written internal body scan with imaginary light. So what's your anchor moment for that one? So think about what it is that you can attach it to that's going to be that prompt. Remember when we talked about the formula before? Has anyone else got a tiny habit? Okay, great. Taking a breath, connecting the movement on my light with my breathing and engaging with my muscles and bones. Sitting at my desk in the morning, stretching. Okay, we've got focus on accomplishment. What went well? Where did I struggle? What did I learn? 3 minutes at the end of each day. So try and find a really specific anchor moment. So what is it? Is it when you turn your laptop off? So if you shut your laptop and that's when you're going to sit there and you will actually do the 3 questions, and then how are you going to celebrate? Okay, so get up, do 5 minutes of breathing exercises and listen to my favorite tune. Great, so that's a great use of the formula, right? So as soon as you're getting up, you're doing 5 minutes of breathing, and then the celebration is listening to your favorite music. That also helps with the jolt of joy if you're listening to your favorite tune. So that's a double-edged sword, that one. It's fabulous. So after I brush my teeth, I will look in the mirror and think positive, motivational thoughts for the day, and then celebrate by saying bingo. Love it. Well done. Great. So you're saving money on calories and sugar. Getting up early to do exercise and skip watching the news. All right. So think about how you can have an anchor moment to that. So is it as soon as your alarm goes off, you'll get up and think about how much exercise you're going to do, and then what the celebration will be. So after I wake up, I'll meditate for 15 minutes and then celebrate by having 15 minutes screen time. Good job, Rob. After I complete a task on my to-do list, I will walk up and down the stairs twice, celebrate by adding to my step count. Okay. When I open the laptop and get ready for the task, I think we've missed a bit of that one, Lisa. After opening my laptop, complete my study modules and then complete my course and start my new career. Those are quite large goals you've got there. So where we talk about tiny habits, it's about trying to make them as small as you possibly can to get started, because then you're more likely to do them again and again and get some success under your belt. All right, so there's some great ideas going on here. So a few things to think about is using this recipe. So make sure that you're using the question. So after you do something, and make sure you've got a great anchor moment, it's something that you do every single day. And make sure that when you think about the routine, it's scaled back to be as small as possible. And then the celebration is something that's going to be really quick and easy, that's going to kind of put you in this really positive state and make you want to do it again. Okay, so when I open my laptop, I'll get ready for the task. I think about my strengths and how I'll use them and say, you've got this, great. When I lie down in bed, the tiny behavior is, what did I do that was fun today? And then celebrate with a fist bump. I love that. So you're actually really reflecting on what was positive during the day and celebrating that. Well done, guys. You're coming up with some great ones. All right. So you can keep writing those down. I'm going to just kind of skip. There's another one here. So this was one that someone came up with in another one of my programs. When I get out of the shower, I will do 3 deep squats and then clap my hands. And this one was about starting to get some really simple exercises in during the day. And obviously after they'd done that for a week, they then increased the number of squats that they were doing. I think it's important to dry yourself down first so you don't slip over, but that's just me. All right, so we've got a few different ones coming up, which is great. So let's talk about what happens when maybe it doesn't work. And this is what BJ Fogg talks about when he's using this formula, is that we need to embrace the mistakes and discoveries and use them to move forward. So if you do find that you implement some of these wellbeing nudges and you've put together what your formula might look like for that tiny habit and it's maybe not working for you, it doesn't mean that it's failed. It means that you need to do a little bit of troubleshooting and figure out what's not working. So if you have a look at page 15 in your booklet, you'll see in that bottom right-hand corner, there's a little section that says troubleshooting. And there's some questions that he gets you to ask yourself that might really help to define what the problem is. And so you can start to change it slightly. So make sure that you're just tweaking that recipe to make it maybe a little bit smaller, and make sure that you've got the prompt there to make it happen. The prompt is really important because if it's not attached to anything, you're unlikely to do it because you'll just forget about it during the day. So I had a client recently talk to me about the fact she'd been trying to eat a healthy breakfast, but she was in such a rush in the morning with her children that she just never got around to it. So she ended up getting the bowl that she wanted to put her porridge in and put it on top of her alarm clock next to her bed. So when she woke up in the morning, that was the prompt. She took that and she went straight to the kitchen and made herself porridge rather than eating whatever it was that she would on dropping her kids off to school in the morning. So make it really, really small because it can make such a difference. All right, so you've got some troubleshooting tips there that can really help you. And what I'd really like to say to you now is that these things are really, really small, but they can have a big impact. So think about how they all start to kind of come together, and think about all of those 6 perma pillars that we've talked about and how you can impact on each one of those to start to improve on your well-being. And linking back to what we talked about at the very beginning around struggle, is that that's a normal part of how our life ebbs and flows. And being able to talk about that is really, really important. So it's making it more normal to have those conversations with people as well. All right, so what I would like to give to you after today is a free ebook. So you'll be able to download that off my website, and you've got my website address on the back of your playbook. And this gives you heaps more tools on what you can do to move yourself from functioning to flourishing. The other thing that you might want to do is to jump on the wellbeing scales. And this is taking the PERMA wellbeing survey, and it basically looks at those 6 pillars, and it will send you a report telling you where you're sitting in each of those pillars. And it gives you around 200 different interventions or wellbeing nudges like we talked about today that you can select from and build your own wellbeing plan. That's absolutely free. So you can just go onto the website and do that, and it will come straight into your inbox once you've finished it. So that's about all from me. I'm happy to open up for some questions if anyone's got any. And my details are on the back of your wellbeing playbook, and they're on the screen. Thanks, Will.
Thank you so much. That was a fantastic session. I hope everyone agrees. One of the things that came out of that to me was that however difficult things are in your life, there are really positive, simple changes you can make quite easily. And having done these myself, it does make a huge difference, because it can take you from a cycle of kind of negativity into a cycle of positivity quite quickly. So think it's just so important to remember these things. We're open for questions now. So if you can go to the Q&A box if you have any questions, please let us know. So rather than doing it in the chat box and the Q&A box, please, I'll just check. There was one question. Please tell us whether the pillars change with a challenge like the COVID-19 pandemic. Any thoughts on that one?
I mean, the research would say that they don't change and that we still need to have, some of each of those pillars as part of our life. But obviously, with COVID going on, health is more important to a lot of people right now, and it's more of a focus. But if we only focus on health and we're not focused on the other 5 pillars, we're not going to have as much impact on our own well-being. So all of them are important.
Okay. Another one question from Andrew. Thanks, Sean. How to keep from being cynical about celebrating such tiny efforts and feeling like you're being treated like a child?
Well, it's you're treating yourself that way. So I would think about, you're judging yourself. So let's go back to thinking about using a bit more curiosity and generosity in the way that we're thinking about ourselves and not judging ourselves so much.
Sure.
Also thinking about how we do that so that, nobody else might be around to see that. So what is it that you can do to celebrate that's going to make you feel good and change the way that your brain's thinking about that? So there's a lot of different ideas on that page in the book. And there's, for even me, I was quite cynical about it when I first saw it. Is coming up with one that works for you. And there's some really simple ones. So it can be a fist bump. It can be, just getting up and doing a victory lap. It can be something really, really simple, ticking it off your to-do list. Find one that works for you. And once you've done it a few times, you'll probably notice the difference and you'll be more likely to try it again.
Great. Just one, Annie just asked a question. What's the main reason why people don't continue to practice these habits?
So there's a lot of different reasons, and it can be when you get to a point where you're really struggling, and this is where we get to the other side of psychology, right? We're talking about positive psychology. When we get to the clinical side of psychology, it can be really difficult to implement ideas on your own well-being because you actually need further help.
Yep.
So that's one of the reasons why that can happen, and reaching out for help and talking about struggle is the first step to kind of helping with that.
Sure.
The other thing can be that there's so much going on that, we feel like we just don't have time, and that's why with this session, what we're trying to focus on is making it so small that it's hard not to do it. So that's where the tiny habit comes in. So if you start really small, you're more likely to make a difference.
Does accountability help in this situation, Sean? Because one of the things that the value that coaching brings is that accountability if you have a coach, but you could obviously use a friend as well. Would that be useful?
Yes, absolutely. Accountability helps in lots of different areas. So I would say, and we do talk about this, and it's in your books there as well, in your playbooks, we talk about buddying up with people. So if there's someone else that you think could really, use some help with their well-being right now, share what you've just learnt with them and then buddy up with them and hold each other accountable for it.
Good. Question from Rob. Should I ask all my staff to do a Gallup test? What happens if the test shows the person is not the right fit for the job required?
Right. So that's a big question. There's the strengths assessments won't tell you that they're the wrong person for the job. What it tells you is what their naturally or innate strengths are and what they're good at. And then it's about how do you start to leverage those strengths in whatever kind of work that they're doing. And you can have completely different strengths and move into different industries and different kind of roles and responsibilities. So it's more about understanding that person and then learning how you can start to leverage those more. I can talk about that more if you want to email me. I'm happy to have a conversation.
Okay. I'll be sharing Sean's email address after this and the information. So it will come on the email to you later today or tomorrow. Another question from Anne. How does one control the external factors, negative thoughts, etc., that impact well-being? And is it not being judgmental, too much thinking?
So, I go back to there's what I share with a lot of leaders when we're talking about how we start to impact on what's going on for us is about your circle of influence and your circle of control. And it's about, you draw the two circles. You can do it on a piece of paper and think about, well, what do I have control over right now? And what maybe don't I have control over, and what can I influence instead? And then start to put more of your efforts into things that you can control and influence rather than the things that sit outside both of those circles, because that's just a way to make yourself feel terrible, is focusing on the wrong things. And there's obviously a lot of things that we can't control right now, but it's putting effort into the things that we can.
Yeah, and I think that was the point I made. The point I made earlier about there are those small things that everybody can do and that you have control over. Teresa asked a question: is there any way to change your mindset situation if people around you are giving you negative feedback? Everything you are doing seems to be wrong.
Yeah, so I mean, we talk about the fact that emotions are contagious, and that was part of the positive emotions part. So the more that you can help yourself and surround yourself with people who are more positive, the more likely you're going to feel positive as well. So where you're receiving a whole heap of maybe negative feedback or negative feelings from the people around you, it's about thinking about how can you remove yourself from having that much negativity in your life. So maybe limiting the amount of exposure you have to those people. It can be difficult if they're people that you work with every day. But then think about what we talked about in the positive emotion space is how can you be more positive and make that contagious for everyone else? So how do you start to spread that positive contagion to the rest of your team or your family?
Yeah, great. Are there any more questions, guys, before we wrap up? Okay. Just the thanks from Ruth, and that Ruth is going to implement some of these changes, which is fabulous. So thank you, Ruth. Oh, another question come through. One sec, I've just got so I'm trying to read this. Most of what you discussed would seem to apply to the whole of our lives and not just in a work context.
Correct.
Sorry, I can't read this at the moment because I've got boxes coming up over the text. In work context, is there anything that you would highlight as being different from an outside work perspective in what you talked about?
No, I mean, it's all relevant. And this is when I talked at the very beginning about bringing the human back to the way that we go about work is just being your whole self all of the time. Wellbeing is about being yourself and thinking about how you impact on that, whether you're at work or you're at home or you're out with friends. It's about being your whole self all of the time. So how do you bring this to more people that you're in contact with every day?
Okay, so basically it's covers everything, work and personal. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, that's for you, Julian. Is there any other questions, guys, before we wrap up? So I have recorded this session and that will be posted on our website. I'll share the link with you after the session. I'll also share other information, including all Sean's contact details. So going once, twice for last questions. Any last questions before we wrap up? Oh, one more. No, just Annie just saying thanks, Sean. That it was brilliant. So thank you, Sean. That echoes from me. Thank you for the great tips. Okay, so a lot of thank you, Sean. No more questions. So I think I'll wrap up the session by finally thanking you so much. I thought the session was absolutely brilliant. I really thought the book was really useful too. So you can actually provide that additional information and fill the bits in ourselves. Taking action is the most positive thing out of these sessions, and there's certainly lots of actions to be taken. So really appreciate your time. If anybody wants to contact Shana, I'll be providing her contact details. Yeah, we hope to see you at another upcoming webinar. So again, thank you, Sean, and thank you everybody for attending.
Thanks, Will, and thanks everyone for your participation.
Cheers. Bye, everybody.
See you.
Bye.